Hello and welcome to 3 at 3 with Angela James. I'm Angela James and I'm here to answer your writing and publishing questions. Hopefully you saw my fancy intro. Wasn't that fun? I'm using new streaming technology, so hopefully everything goes as it's supposed to go, but please forgive any glitches in advance because this is the first time I'm using this. It's a software called Melon that I am using to stream to you. So thank you for joining me. We have 3 questions that have been submitted for today, and I am excited to dive right into them. So I'm going to do that with the first question. First question for today is, when self-editing before querying, at what point should you bring in beta readers, and at what point should you stop getting feedback and hit submit? Before I answer this question specifically, I do want to point out that there's a couple of different phases that your manuscript should go through, and there are different types of people that you can use to get feedback. So of course you're going to finish your first draft and then you're going to be doing editing. Some people use what's called an alpha reader. An alpha reader is somebody who's seeing super, super, super rough drafts, like super rough drafts, something that you wouldn't share with just anybody, but somebody that you trust to give you feedback as you're writing the book. This is also a role that critique partners can make. Critique partners are other writers, usually other writers, that you have a relationship with where you swap feedback. So you give feedback on something that they've submitted to you, you give feedback on something they've submitted to you. Anyways, you get it. So you can have critique partners. You can also have a critique group. Critique groups and critique partners are great because usually these are people who are, if not writing the same genre that you are, hopefully at least familiar with it, but familiar with giving critique and used to honing in on the problems that need to be addressed. So then, if you're not using critique partners or in conjunction with critique partners, you may also want to use beta readers. The purpose of beta readers is different than critique partners. Now, sometimes people conflate them, but the point of having critique partners and having beta readers is because they serve 2 different functions. Beta readers are just that. When we talk about beta, beta is when you're testing something. So beta readers usually come in once the book is finished. Critique partners and alpha readers can come in at any time. They come in at different points of your writing because they were going to be seeing some rough drafts, especially alpha readers and critique partners are going to be seeing rough drafts. Beta readers are meant for when you have a draft and now you're testing the theory. So just as a non-writing example, I do a course called Book Boss Strategy Intensive Group Coaching, and I held a beta round for a lower price because I wanted to test the process. The framework was in place, so I had the whole course created, but I wanted to test it to see what needed to be improved. So that's a beta test. It's when you're testing something that's done in a rough draft form, but not finalized because you need to find out what still needs to be improved. So beta readers come in when you need somebody to give you feedback on specific things. And this is where a lot of authors sometimes go wrong, is they think that a beta reader is just going to read it and give general feedback. You want to give your beta reader specific things to look for, specific questions to answer. Don't just hand them the book and say, hey, what do you think of this? But instead hand your beta reader the book and say, okay, there's a few key things that I want you to answer after you've read it. Here's the things that I'm wondering about. So ask them for specific feedback. Don't just ask them for general feedback. So in the beta round comes when you finish your draft. So to answer the question, at what point should you bring in beta readers? After you've finished your draft, you may have gone through some self-edits. I usually suggest going through some self-edits first, then bring in the beta readers to test and see what you've missed, what you've fixed, what you were still struggling with. That's the point that you should bring in beta readers. Don't bring in beta readers when you're in the middle of editing. Those are alpha readers. Don't bring in beta readers when you've got everything finalized and you're just looking for reviews. Those are advanced reader copy reviewers. Those are ARC reviewers. So beta readers come after the manuscript is roughly done and you're setting it aside for yourself to give yourself a little break from it. And now you're just going to be thinking about, what comes next. And you want to be thinking about that while the beta readers are working on what they need to work on. So at what point, I'm going to need to go back. At what point should you stop getting feedback and hit submit? Well, yes, you can workshop something, over workshop something. And I would just say that you're going to select your group of beta readers. You have identified the issues. You're going to fix whatever they identify, and then you're going to hit submit when you're querying. Of course, this is different than if you're going to be publishing yourself, because when you're publishing yourself, you're going to be using an editor, maybe several editors. If you're doing a developmental and light editor, you might also have a copy editor and a proofreader. Beta readers can come at different points during that process. You may want them to come before the edit so that you can get the book in as great a shape as possible in order to deliver it to the editor. And you may want it to come after the edit or after the edits, after you've worked on it for several rounds with somebody else, just to see if there are certain spots that are still not clear to the readers. So that is my answer for that question. Hopefully it was clear. If you have any follow-up questions or if I need to clarify anything, please let me know. All right. Next question. The next question is, how does an indie author best go about finding a reputable translator? The process is intimidating and I've seen so many potential pitfalls. And if I got a foreign translation, should I hire an editor? I would like to start by saying yes. Getting a translation done is a complicated endeavor because there are things that you need to know about the international market. For one thing, there are specific contracts and contract clauses that you need to have in place with a translator. You cannot just hire a translator and then assume that you own all of the rights to that and go on your way with publishing, because international markets have different contract clauses that are required within the translator author relationship. So you need to make sure that you understand what that contract needs to look like and you have it in place. So many authors that I know don't operate with a contract for anything that they do, whether it's cover art, edits, translations, narration. You should have a contract for everything. Everything should have a contract. So for instance, as an editor, I have a contract that I send you. If you hire an editor and they don't have a contract, then you would want to ask them if they would be amenable to signing one, because you want to make sure that your rights are protected and their rights are protected and everything is laid out clearly. So have a contract for the translation. So yes, having a reputable translator is difficult. I don't have a ton of experience hiring translators. I have certainly worked with translators in the past with working in a publisher, but I've never had to hire one myself. I think the first place to start is looking for recommendations from authors who have done translations in the specific markets. Now, remember, for most markets, you're going to need a different translator for every market. And by that, I mean, if you want to publish in Germany, you're going to need a German translator. If you want to publish in France, you're going to need a French translator. If you want to publish in South America, you're going to need a translator for the different languages that are spoken there. So whether it's Portuguese, Spanish, and so on. So hiring a translator is only hiring a translator for one language. It's not hiring a translator and getting multiple languages. That's the first thing. So you need to first decide what language you're going to target. What market are you targeting? So what type of translator are you looking for? Now look for people who have done this, who are using translators, and you can do a couple of things. You can look at publishing. So let's say that you're looking at publishing in Germany and you want a German translator. Look at publishing houses and look at their copyright pages and see if the translator is mentioned, because often those translators aren't working for the publishing house exclusively. They are available to hire on contract. So if you want to hire a translator in German, look for who the publishers are using, look for who other indie authors have used. And ask those indie authors. You're not going to be able to email the publisher and be like, hey, what was your experience working with this translator? But sometimes you can email other indie authors, especially if it's somebody you know or have a loose connection with. Also utilize the author groups that you're in. Specifically, if you're in any indie author groups or publishing specific groups, you can ask people for recommendations. Remember, when you're asking for recommendations, you need to specify what language, what market you're looking for. You can't just say, hey, who do you recommend as a translator? You actually have to specify what market you're looking for. And then you're going to ask them if they have a contract. You're going to ask their rates. You're going to figure out, you want to know your budget ahead of time, obviously. And you're just going to figure out whether or not they're going to work for your project. Do they normally work on romance, or do they only work on mystery and thriller? That's the other thing. You do want somebody who is knowledgeable about the genre that you're working with, because there are certain terms of phrase or other things that they're going to have to translate that fit into their market and fit into the genre both. If you get a foreign translation or an international translation, should I hire an editor? Yeah. I have heard some horror stories of translations, and even translations happening within a publishing house where the meaning has been completely changed, names, the translator changed like a theme. So yes, you do want to have an editor. And that is why you want to pick your market. You want to pick like one market to start with. It's probably going to be the biggest market, whether that's France, Germany, or somewhere else. And you do want somebody who's going to be able to read it and tell you if the translation seems accurate to the English book. So that is another layer. And again, that's why it's very expensive to enter into translation. And you should only do it if you are certain that this is the right step in your career versus focusing on English market and publishing more books, because it's going to take time and energy from you. And if you have the budget to do it. Okay, hopefully that answered that question. Please let me know if you have any follow-up questions. And the last question. What's the best way to craft a one-sentence pitch for a romance novel? In truth, crafting a one-sentence pitch for any book, regardless of genre fiction, I'm talking fiction, and specifically genre fiction, is going to be pretty the same, not just for romance, but across mystery, thriller, romance, science fiction, fantasy. And the first thing is you want to focus in on what is most interesting or unique about your book, whether that's the characters, the main conflict, whether that's external or internal conflict. It might be the setting, it could be story setup, it could be tropes and themes. So you want to focus in on what is most interesting or unique about your book, what's going to make your book stand out. If you cannot think of something, then it may be possible that you don't have a pitch or a book that's ready to be pitched to traditional publishers. The thing is traditional publishers have a very limited amount of books that they can take. And they do see a lot. They see a lot of submissions and a lot of pitches. So when you're crafting your pitch, you have to remember that when an agent is trying to decide what to acquire and what to represent, in their mind, they're trying to sell to the publisher. Okay, they're not trying to sell to the reader at this point. They're trying to sell to the publisher. So your pitch has to be unique enough to stand out to the agent, that the agent knows how they're going to sell it to the publisher. When the agent pitches to the publisher, the agent is pitching to the publisher who has the not the reader, but the retail buyer in mind. And what I mean by retail buyer is the people at Walmart, Indigo, Barnes and Noble. There's one or two people at each place who are in charge of deciding what books go on the shelves, whether it's Target, Walmart, Indigo. For each section, for instance, at Walmart, there's like maybe one or two buyers. Target, there's one or two buyers. At Barnes and Noble, there might be somebody who's in charge of romance and thrillers and mystery, but there's not a lot of people who are retail buyers. So the publisher is acquiring books based on what they can convince the retail merchandiser, retail buyer, to put on the shelves. They're not necessarily thinking of the readers, they're thinking of the buyers. So when you're crafting your pitch, you just need to remember that your pitch is not just for one person or one stage. It's going to be something that's important for all the stages. And that is why it's important for your book to have something unique about it. So the first thing you need to figure out is what's unique about my book? What makes my book stand out? And again, it can be any of these things: characters, main conflict, external, internal, setting, story setup, tropes, themes, and other things that might be unique. It might be your use of a trope or a theme. It might be a twist on something. It could be that something is topical. So you're doing like a ripped from the headlines type book or a theme. It just has to be something that makes it stand out. So you have to ask yourself when you're crafting this, how can I position this to get attention? So I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you, this is a DV pitch that I use as an example of a great pitch. And you'll see why when I flash it up on screen. And this is from a few years ago. And let me just, okay. I'm going to show you this. Okay, so you should be able to now see my screen. And on screen is Twitter. And this is a pitch from Natasha Bowen from 2018 that she used for DV Pit. Simi, a black mermaid who collects the souls of slaves thrown overboard during the Middle Passage, rescues a boy from the sea. Together they fight to save his siblings from slavers, West African mythological creatures, and gods. And she has identified this as YA, own voices, fantasy, and historical. So when you look at this pitch, and you can see this pitch got a lot of attention very, very, very quickly. Like within minutes of it having been posted, it had 1,000 likes and many retweets. So you can see that this got a lot of attention. What drew the attention? Well, the attention is the setting. Straight up, we know the conflict. The characters draw your attention because, for one thing, own voices, finding fantasy and own voices is very important to the publishers. And the setting is interesting, the fantasy setting, the slaver setting, sorry, I have to go back and look at this. The mermaids as a character, the souls of the slaves gives you an idea of something that's happening. The we're bringing in these mythological gods, these mythological elements, as well as the idea of rescuing these souls of the slaves and rescuing somebody else. So there's a lot of interest here. In fact, this author has packed in a lot of things that make it stand out in a very short, very, very, very short word count. So I'm going to post, by the way, that book has since been published, and it is called Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. And I have put this in the comments. Hopefully you can see it in the comments in different places. If you can't, I will, if you can't see it in the comments, I put it here as well. So you can look it up on Amazon or your favorite retailer. This has been published. It was published last year, and I think has since had a sequel published as well. And it has a beautiful cover, like absolutely stunning cover. So I do recommend you look for it. So that's a really great example of how you're crafting a pitch, just a very quick one sentence pitch. Other things to keep in mind is that you want to cut the fat, meaning mundane details do not belong. Trim everything that isn't interesting. When we look at that pitch from Natasha Bowen, every word on that page has something of interest, or they work together to create something of interest. There's no over explaining, there's no tucking mundane details that don't really add anything to the uniqueness or the attention. So you do want to make sure that you're trimming this to really distill it down. Keep it tight. You don't want to try and cram too much in, just what's going to hook their attention. When they get your query, when they read your query letter, they can find out other details. So keep it really tight. And remember that you want to intrigue somebody, but if you need to give away an important detail in order to do that, that's okay too. You're looking for the best way to grab their attention that accurately represents the book. So this is the other thing. Don't choose something about your book that does not accurately represent your book. Don't try and trick somebody into reading it. Make sure that the pitch accurately represents and reflects the story. All right, that is everything that I have for all of the questions that I have for this time. We are going to be doing the next 3 at 3 on November 8th. And just as a reminder, you can submit your questions for the 3 at 3 at any time. We collect them on an ongoing basis. You don't have to wait in order to submit your question. There is a form. There's a form that is linked in the description below all of the videos. I've also just put it in the comments as well. So go ahead and submit your questions for 3 at 3. I will answer any publishing or writing related questions. If I can't answer, I will say I don't know. I will try and give you as much information as where to seek the answer, or I will find somebody who does know the answer. I'm Angela James. Thank you so much for joining me for this 3 at 3. You can find the recording in my Facebook group, on YouTube, or on LinkedIn, or if you're part of the From Written to Recommended author community, the video will also be available to you too. We'll see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks very much.